Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
Hello. Thanks for joining us on Mission Evolution. We're coming to you on X-Zone TV and Simul TV from our broadcast studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, bringing the latest evolutionary information from today's leading experts. This hour, we'll consider unmasking deep secrets, Christianity's critical wrong turn. Sometimes fiction is a great way to address truth. We can more easily entertain concepts and ideas in a non-threatening story before facing them as fact. Barbara Hand Clow has artfully woven truth into fiction, addressing one of the most challenging topics of our time: revolutionary information about the historical past and the corruption in the Vatican. Joining us this hour to discuss what she found when authoring her well-researched trilogy, Revelations of the Ruby Crystal, Revelations of the Aquarian Age, and Book 3, Revelations from the Source, is Barbara Hand Clow. Barbara is an internationally acclaimed astrologer, ceremonial teacher, author, and fiction writer. Her website, handclow2012.com. Barbara, thanks for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Hi, Gwilda. Good to see you.
So good to see you. So we've had you on the show before, thoroughly enjoyed it, of course. And this time we're going to be working with fiction rather than fact, which is really a fun thing. So I'd like to start out with whatever you're the author of a lot of nonfiction books. What made the switch to fiction?
Well, I kind of reached the end of my rope with a series of writing nonfiction books. That's a real natural thing. And so since I love to write so much, but I didn't want to be in that field anymore, I tuned in and realized that I really wanted to write fiction. So the problem was I had not written fiction before, and it was going to be a learning curve. So I went into my writing studio with all my crystals and all my assistants and my Pleiadian guides. And I said, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do now. And how do I do that? And at that point, they came through they told me to get a yellow legal tablet and a pen. And they came through with about 5 or 6 pages listing the names of the characters, their ages, their profession, their background, what country they lived in, very, very detailed information. And it was all new to me, which I thought was really quite remarkable. And then preceding that point, I had also examined things from an astrological point of view. And this was back in May of 2010. So from an astrological point of view, I was actually, what I did is I decided, well, where do I want to go? And I went, well, of course, where would you go in 2010? You'd go to the end of the Mayan calendar, which is either 2011 or 2012. I use both dates. And so I got out on all my astrological ephemerises and support books and all that, and I examined reality from 2010 to 2012 through 2012. And realized that our social aspects of our culture and political aspects of our culture were going to collapse in 2020, March 2020 particularly, specifically. And so that was quite an amazing revelation itself. And so I decided, well, what I need to do is I need to take this information on this paper with all these characters, and I need to create a fictional narrative, fictional story of the lives of these characters in Rome and in the United States, because they were both Americans and they were Italians. And I decided that I was going to track their lives from about, at this point, by the time I got the work done, from like 2014, 2015 through 2021. It ended in 2021. Because once the capital was invaded in Washington, D.C., that was clearly the end of this series for me. So that's how it came in, Gwilda, and it was a learning curve. Like, I think the first book is good. I think the second book is very good. And I think the third book is really high-grade fiction. And that's kind of my own judgment about it. And I worked as a publisher, as an acquisitions editor for 20 years. So I'm qualified to judge, like, is this a good book or not?
So you step back and you put on your other cap and you go, I can do this.
Yeah, I do that all the time. As a matter of fact, I have two identities. Barbara Clow, the publisher. I'm not working in publishing anymore, so that's pretty much over. And then Barbara Hand Clow, my name. And back in the old days when I had both identities, people didn't realize that there was one person. It was very advantageous to me because I did acquisitions, and I would have been flooded with too much material if people realized I was the same person. So that's kind of the story.
So I've seen your books, of course, the last three, the fiction that we're talking about, the trilogy, and they seem very, very well researched. Where did you find your material?
Oh, that's such a great question to bring in at this point, because you're so astute, because there's two issues with fiction. How good is the background material, the history, the sociology, and then are the characters really alive and are they really exciting? And so the non-fictional aspect, if you want to call it, the research behind it was my PhD, but it was my PhD that I never got. And the story on that is that I had finished a master's in theology at Loyola with Matthew Fox as the director. And I wanted to go on and do a PhD in patristics. Patristics is the study of the church from about 100 to 400 AD, approximately. And so this has taken us right back into the early Christian period. And so, but the problem was I couldn't get a PhD in patristics because I had 4 children and a husband. And I was working at a publishing company. It was out of the question. Couldn't do it. Okay, so I gave up, but I kept on researching. And for 20, actually really 30 years, I kept files and background on theology, patristics, and what was going on in the contemporary church. So if you think about it, it's logical that these characters who came in through, it's interesting where these characters come from. They're the vehicles of thought. And it's interesting that they were in Rome, mostly in Rome, and then in the United States. And it's interesting that there was a lot of Judeo-Christian issues in the background of these characters. So it all fits together, but at the same time, it's kind of miraculous. And it was a joy to write fiction. It was
so your whole history was the research in a lot of ways.
Well, yeah, but what happened is, as it turned out, one of the characters, Sarah Adamson, who later on marries and has another name, Sarah was getting her, she was finishing her PhD in patristics, and she was located in Rome. So, of course, well, first of all, I know you know this, but writers and authors' characters are always parts of their personality. They're always coming from the inner self of the writer, which means that a lot of my friends have had a lot of fun speculating on which part was which part. They're all a figment of me. Like, for example, there's a wonderful character, Alessandro, who's a excuse me, I got that wrong. Alessandro is another character who's close, but Lorenzo Giannini is a very, very famous Jungian analyst in Rome and a great therapist who's integrating past life regression and multi-dimensional realities. He's a really, really great therapist. And I almost became a Jungian analyst. When I'm faced with that choice of like getting a PhD in patristics or becoming a Jungian analyst, at least I could have had an income from being an analyst. But the problem was I had a job. So it just all worked out perfectly.
As life tends to, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Now, Barbara, there's a lot of challenging information that's come through in the trilogy. Have you had any pushback about it?
Actually, I haven't. And, I would have expected that myself, especially in my attempts to integrate Judaic issues with Christian issues, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure. But I thought that maybe I would get some projection from Jewish people who thought that I was biased in some way. I thought certainly with Christians and Catholics that I would get pushback, but I'm getting nothing so far but a lot of interest in the central theme of this trilogy, which is the issue of the precession of the equinoxes, 4,000 years of history, going through the age of Pisces and into the age of Aquarius now, and all the issues that have to do with working out our Jewish background. And I've discovered that in the last few years that I'm part Jewish, and I didn't know that. But because of Cherokee DNA research on my Cherokee side, it turns out that I'm part Jewish. And I thought that was really interesting because when I went all the way through the trilogy and wrote the whole thing, I didn't know that. And
Oh,
so I
amazing.
think a lot of people, to tell you the truth, are really ripe for sorting out those issues. And I think this trilogy is not only a good vehicle for it intellectually, but it's fun. The lives of the characters are fun.
And we're about out of time in this segment, but do you think that the fact that it was presented as fiction has also helped to keep you from being targeted?
I didn't quite understand your question. I
I'm
heard you.
sorry. Like I said, we're about out of time, but do you think that the fact that you presented it as fiction is part of what's helped you from being targeted?
I think that's likely, and I also just want to give an accolade to Dan Brown for making it possible for content fiction, that is fiction with an intense background issue, to be popular.
So it wasn't the first time this sort
Yeah,
of
so
thing
I'd
has
say that
been.
content fiction is coming into its golden age,
Mm.
and I think that's made it a lot easier for me because people just simply go, "Why not just enjoy myself? I don't care who." She doesn't have to prove anything. Let's just have fun, and I
Let's
think
just have
that's
fun.
an easier way to do it.
Very nice. Well, it is that magic moment that we need to take a station break. Barbara and I will return very shortly, so don't go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Hello again. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us this hour discussing hidden truths is Barbara Hand Clow. Her website, handclow2012.com. Barbara, I've got a question for you here. Go figure. In your fiction writing, you've tackled some really intense, controversial topics, such as the Christianity's takeover, corruption by the Roman patriarchy, as well as sexual abuse of children in the Catholic Church. What sent you down that path?
Well, we are basically out of the age of Pisces at this point, and we're in the very, very early stages of the age of Aquarius. And so, since the age of Pisces was the age of the development of the power of organized religions, and since Christianity and then Islam have been the primary, and also, of course, the Jewish religion continued, since these three religions that all come from the father Abraham, since they have dominated the age of Pisces, then it made sense to me that the thing to do was to go right into the major religions. And in this case, I concentrated on Christianity because it's my expertise. I could give the same level of criticism I gave to Christianity. I could easily give it to Islam and Judaism, but that's not the point of what we're doing here. And so I concentrated on those issues because it's logical that as we come to the end of Age of Pisces, that the organized religions would go through some kind of a purification, some kind of clarification, some kind of a transformation, hopefully. I'm not hoping that the religions go away because I really believe that religion serves many needs for many, many people. But certainly it's fair to say we've got to go to another level. And that's where, if we go after the Catholic Church, the big issue is definitely celibacy and priestly sexual abuse, because the Christian Catholic, basically Catholic Church, is the major religion that has promulgated celibacy since around 1000 AD and has come up with the idea that Jesus was celibate and was never married and all kinds of issues like that. And this was the place to go because this is where the big trouble is. And right now, of course, it's prophetic because the Catholic Church is basically dealing with a lot of bankruptcy issues because of the settlements over the abusing priests.
Oh, my goodness. So the celibacy issue was, it might seem a backdoor way to look at it, but was that linked to the desecration or the invalidation of the feminine?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the Christianity, unfortunately, from the very beginning, has been a misogynist, which means a religion or a system that denigrates the feminine. And that's a huge issue at this point, and has been all the way through the last 2,000 years. It's the cause of much of the malaise that all of us live and suffer with, for sure.
So again, the celibacy issue, doesn't that involve putting one's sexuality into denial and then it comes out of the shadow and abuse?
Well, the issue with celibacy, first of all, celibacy has its place. And some people have fantastic spiritual experiences working with celibacy. But the question is whether the cadre, the normal priests, and then the bishops and monsignors, etc., whether the teaching pool of the church, the question was whether they were capable of celibacy. Because since they set themselves up insisting that they're celibate, but clearly they haven't been, and this has now been, needless to say, firmly established, then it's something that really, really needed a serious examination. And there was a movie about this called Spotlight, which came out a couple of years after Ruby Crystal came out. And Spotlight is really very much like Ruby Crystal, I have to say. So the spotlight's on it.
Absolutely, it is.
Yeah.
The as the years have gone on, has a lot of shadow built up in the practice in the Catholic Church that's now being brought to light because of the shift of ages?
Gwilda, this is a really interesting issue to bring up. And I'm just going to have to say it. I'll just say it. What has happened is the shadow that has been building up over 2,000 years has become demonic. And this is really an issue. And the only thing that's going to clear an issue that's become demonic, and because of course it's based on secrecy, is for the people to see what has gone on, comprehend why it happened, and refuse to let it occur anymore. And that process is happening. We've made a lot of progress. And even though I've left the church, actually I left the church because I was afraid for my own children, and it turned out I was correct. They could have been abused in the parish that they were in, and it wasn't easy for me to leave the church. But even though I've left it, and there's a whole lot of us out there, I still care about the church's welfare very, very deeply.
Barbara, would you mind defining demonic as you were using it?
Oh, that's a hard one. Okay, then we have to go back. You want to get complicated for a second?
Just a second.
We have to go back.
But be gentle, Barbara, be gentle.
I'll be gentle. We have to go back in this case. It was specifically, there's two levels of demonic. For example, one character in the book, Armando Pierleoni, an Italian, is clearly struggling with demonic issues. And we could talk about that. But I think the more fundamental issue goes back to the background of this whole trilogy, which is to go back to around 2 or 100 BC, back to the time when the Gnostics were a very powerful church on our planet, a very powerful spirituality. And the Gnostics were spiritual teachers who worked with the precession of the equinoxes. And they believed that the changes of the ages are very, very important. For example, we just went out of Pisces and we're in Aquarius. And notice how difficult things are. Whenever we have a shift of the ages, it's always extremely difficult. So here we are. So if we go back to 100 BC, we're going back to when the age of Aries went into the age of Pisces. And at that time, the Gnostics were like a group of very, very advanced spiritual teachers, and they taught about the archons. And the archons are some kind of extra dimensional or extraterrestrial species that affects humans and causes demonic issues to come up. They infect the human mind and confuse the human heart. And the Gnostics were teaching people about who they were, what they were doing, and how to avoid it. And then Christianity came along and Jesus came along. And after Jesus was on the planet, then of course we start to get the institutional church. And the institutional church suppressed the Gnostics and got rid of all their literature, got rid of the story that they were teaching on the planet. And this is a really big deal, Gwilda, because the Gnostics were teaching sacred spirituality that goes back 10, 20, 30,000 years. They were carrying the lineage of the really, really ancient wisdom teachings on this planet.
Weren't they also, Barbara, earth-based?
Oh, yeah. The Gnostics are all, these are archons. The Gnostics were just earth-based spiritual teachers who were in a long, long ancient lineage. And one of their specialties was precession of the equinoxes. Because
well, then they would be earth-based and star-based.
Everybody is, including you.
Yes.
We're all cosmic. And of course, that's another thing we're going through right now is people are starting to pick up on that one too, and I'm glad that's happening. But back to the Gnostics, the Christian response to them was to basically squash them totally. And why did they do that? Because they figured they were going to dominate the age of Pisces. Because the Gnostics were teaching about what we should be doing during the age of Pisces. The Gnostics are at this point are like leaving Aries and going into Pisces. And what they were teaching was that it was time for the religions on the planet to be religions of the heart, and it was time for an age of love and mysticism. And the Catholic Church, in my opinion, partly because it was still controlled by the old Jewish God. This is where we get into the plot of the novel, where Sarah Appel is researching Marcion, who was a teacher right around 0 AD. And Marcion's issue was that when the Christian religion formulated itself and when he became a follower of Jesus, Marcion did, and when the new religion came in, according to Marcion, the new religion must not adopt the old Jewish God, Yahweh. Now, this is not to say, after all, Marcion in the beginning of his life was a Jew, just like a lot of people in the Middle East were. This was not to take away from the Judaic teachings and what they had given from like 2200 BC up to this point when Jesus came. It was simply to say that the Jewish religion should go on with its own teachings and religion and theology, and the new religion based on Jesus should be a new religion. And
now, Barbara, when we're about out of time in this segment, of course,
sure.
But when the church squashed the Gnostics, did they not still adopt a lot of their principles, but kept them hidden, like the secrets that were taught only to high-ranking clergy?
Yeah, it's always hard to know what goes on in secret societies, right? It just is. But what the Christian Church did, of course, is they adopted the sacred sites of the earlier period by building churches on ancient sacred sites. They adopted the seasonal timing in many cases of the ancient religions. And sure, they took a lot of information from the Gnostics. But what they did was there's these people called the early church fathers. And that's what patristics specializes in, like Tertullian and the different early theologians. And what they just said is they took all the Gnostic wisdom and they reinterpreted it according to their own purposes, which is typical. There's nothing unusual about this. It's just time to recognize it.
Absolutely. And we are just virtually out of time. But when we get on the other side, I'd like to talk about, when we get on the other side of the break, I'd like to talk about the Catholic Church was the last one to hold depossession and exorcism as part of its practice. So I find that very interesting in the face of what we've been talking about, demonic and et cetera, et cetera. Real quickly, yes or no, did the Gnostics have depossession in their practice?
Well, of course they did, because they knew all about the archons. But you're very astute catching this, because the question of why the Catholic Church has been one of the few places where
We're going to have to pick up on the rest of that. Hold that thought on the other side of a quick station break. Barbara and I will be right back to continue our discussion. So you stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Hi there. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. Our guest this hour is Barbara Hand Clow. Her website, handclow2012.com. Barbara, we were just getting into the fascinating topic of the Gnostics doing depossession and working with that part of our lives, and the Catholics actually having held depossession and exorcism in their practice. Would you mind continuing from there?
Well, I'll go right to the Eleusinian mysteries of Greece. And the Eleusinian mysteries were a mystery school that lasted for about 1,000 years. I think from it doesn't matter, like 700 BC to about 300 AD, something like that. And they specialized in using herbs and various substances, probably LSD, most likely. That's what most people think. And their way of working with depossession is much more effective, I think, than almost any one I've ever seen, because their way of doing it is to take a person to a very, very high state of consciousness so that they have an experience of the cosmic union and the oneness. And then once somebody goes to that level, you can't possess them. You can't take over their soul and their mentality, because they've reached such a high level of consciousness. So
I want to insert a question here that relates to that. Isn't possession actually a polarized stance, where you're way polarized in one direction, which drops your frequency, and then you're subject to those influences?
Well, I'm not an expert on possession, but certainly, like anybody who's working with consciousness, I've worked very hard to observe anything strange that was going on with me. And I've discovered, at least personally, that the answer to it, if there's anything that seems to want to kind of invade me or affect me, is to go very deeply into the heart and just reintegrate myself, put myself back on my midline, the line that's going all the way through us, and simply stay in the light. And I've never experienced any difficulty with it. And it's a very big issue, because people dealing with mental problems, of course, have very big issues with possession, because they themselves are not holding themselves well together, and so then they're more prone to possibly being affected.
Amazing. So is possession a way of other entities entering into this reality?
I think so. And so I think that in my own personal teachings, which the trilogy, some of the characters are following, nine-dimensional consciousness, the most important teaching that I've given is, if we're really, really grounded in the third dimension, which is linear space and time, and if we really have a grip on our experience in the third dimension, then we really can't be invaded. And when people start having mental issues, they're having a lot of problems with going out of body and becoming maybe psychotic even, and then they're very prone to all kinds of other energetic forces. And beyond demonic possession, what about extraterrestrials? I mean, there's a whole range of consciousness energies that can affect us that we have to really keep an eye on.
And that's pretty fascinating. Another whole topic, and maybe something to have you on again with. But we think of the other entities being possessing spirits, and we look for extraterrestrials to arrive in a little saucer. But what if they are actually consciousnesses? That's the way they present themselves here.
I should go back to Armando Pierleone, because one of the interesting things about this trilogy is in the first book, Ruby Crystal, it's fair to say that Armando is very possessed, even into the early parts of the second book. He's a painter, an artist, and he's also a sexual abuser. And that's where I really worked with the issue that you're talking about, was through Armando. But what's different about the work that I've done here and a lot of other writers is that often when you have a character who is basically possessed and dealing with evil forces, basically they end up just murdering a whole bunch of people and then getting murdered themselves. That's what happens. But Armando goes through an ascension. And that's where I think there's a real, and I know you haven't been able to read the second and the third book. But what happened was Armando gradually pulls himself together, creates a happy marriage. And then once he's grounded in the third dimension with a happy marriage and children and his artwork, then he starts to go to a high state of consciousness. And by the end of the third book, Revelations from the Source, Armando goes through just an incredible high consciousness ascension type experience. So that's really my gift to it. I haven't really examined possession issues that much.
So it sounds like Armando is an example of how we really need to build that ladder rather than just jump. A lot of people go and have ayahuasca experiences and this and that, and it totally destabilizes them
No.
because they aren't grounded
Like
here.
with Eleusinian mysteries in Greece. And I'm pretty sure I had a past life where I experienced that. So I feel like I understand that one. People have to go through immense preparation. And by the way, in the third book, Armando also has to go through preparation because you can't break into these higher zones until your basic reality. And then there's talk about another issue here is the fourth dimension, which is our experience with the collective mind and our issues with the culture. We also need to go through a purification and a kind of awakening regarding how negative forces can affect us, just in those fields. So it's a lot of work.
What isn't, right? What worth having isn't.
Yeah.
So it sounds like the trilogy really addresses this very issue that regardless of where we start, we can't just jump out of it. And there's all this preparation and initiation
Yeah.
that we need to do in order to reach higher consciousness. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah,
That
and
being
also, the other interesting thing about this trilogy is because I was tracking the time from 2010 to 2021, then that meant I had to really get politics into it. Trump had to be in there. Everybody had to be in there. And so the reason that is very valuable is, first of all, it shows how events unfolded, which I think a time is going to come when a lot of people are going to value this, because the question is, what the hell happened? I mean, when you think of that 10-year period in the end of the Mayan calendar, a lot of people are going, what was that? And I think understanding that's very valuable, but also even more valuable is there's little sneaky teachings in this trilogy where showing how each one of the characters handles what's, quote, out there, the outside reality, and how they handle politics and how they handle a spiritual crisis.
amazing, because it's like, particularly after the pandemic, but that was just kind of like the cherry on top of all of it, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's kind of still staggering around
That's
without grounding, trying to go back to the old, but it's not available anymore.
Yeah,
Um,
it was
and
very, very, as you know, very, very wounding because of the deliberate separation of people on the power of the by the global elite. I call the pandemic the plandemic, and I don't mind saying it because it clearly had a purpose. And what really freaked me out is it really did accomplish its purpose. A lot of people have been radically separated. A lot of people are lonely. A lot of people are struggling. And I think, speaking of getting ourselves back into 3D at this point, it involves, number one, getting rid of the separation and moving out of the loneliness and the difficulty. And it also involves working at busting the people who created this. And I also do a astrological on my own website. I give astrological advice on the equinoxes and the solstices. And I just finished one, of course. The solstice is tomorrow. And I think this year is going to be, especially the summer, a lot of these people like Fauci and Walensky, et cetera, they're going to be exposed for what they did. And that's up to the Congress. That's the most important thing. If the Congress wants to protect democracy and the American public, and if they supposedly don't want Trump in or whatever their issue is, they've got to do their job and they've got to expose these people.
But isn't this a time that supports exposing on all levels, not just political, which of course I can't go into too deeply in the program, but on all different levels, like you were saying, in the church, in interpersonal relationships?
Mm-hmm. Well, Gwilda, because I'm doing this website, it's basically going to cover 2023 through 2027. I'll just let the cat out of the bag. I'm doing those 4 years because I see a building harmonic kind of convergence. That's an old term, but it's this. I see a building astrological situation that's going to favor bringing light into the darkness, exposing these people, and really, it's really going to favor the people who are working with morality and ethics, and who care about this planet, and who care about the universe itself. I'm actually optimistic, but this is like birthing. This is very, very difficult.
Absolutely, it is.
Yes. Yeah.
So when you were talking about how we need to focus on regaining our unity and going back into 3D in order to then get ourselves back together enough to move forward with the energies that are coming, I thought you also said that 4D is more to do with unity than 3D. Did I miss something there?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that. No, what happens with see, I work with 9 dimensions, and I don't stop at the 4th dimension the way Einstein did. And so the way it works basically is 3D is linear space and time, and we all know what that is. And then what happens is all of us in linear space and time are participating in the collective. And the collective is definitely not unity. The collective splits things into dark and light and positive and negative. And the splitting and the polarization of the 4th dimension is what stretches us and causes us to go higher with our consciousness and go more deeply into things. And if we really keep that process moving, then we move into the 5th dimension, which is the heart. And so the real struggle that we're right in the middle of right now is coping with 4D, because coping with 4D involves all these dark issues right now. The 4th dimension does not have to be potential nuclear holocaust, basically killing people off with vaccines and drugs or whatever. You can name a whole list. It doesn't have to be that way. And in successful sacred cultures, and this is where I've done a lot of work in my past lives, what happens is the people in the culture create art and theater and love and beauty and festivals, and they play with the dark and the light. And
we're going to have to pick up on the dark and the light on the other side of a quick break. Sure. Please stay. This is Barbara, and I continue to explore fiction, truth, and hushed revelations. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Welcome back. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. This hour, our special guest is Barbara Hand Clow. Her website, handclow2012.com. Barbara, we were just starting to get into the very interesting thing you were talking about, the dimensions, and I love your work on dimensions, by the way, always have. But you were talking about how when we move into the 4th dimension, right? That was the 4th dimension was working with polarities, dark and light, and then the 5th dimension we move into a more heart or unified place. Mm-hmm. It seems like there's purpose there. That we have to maybe work through the dark and light before we can find that place of heart. Would you speak to that a little bit for us?
Yeah. All of us who are hanging out here right now, we're on the wheel of karma. And in my system, we have many, many, many lifetimes and many, many collective experiences. And what happens with that is sometimes the fourth dimension during different phases of our lives is a very positive experience, which is basically, there's another reason why Armando is a painter in the trilogy, because the best way to work through the fourth dimension is with art. And the more creative we can be, and that doesn't mean you have to be a painter or writer. It means that you need to participate in artistic experiences. And so in really healthy cultures, the fourth dimension doesn't, and by the way, the most healthy culture I've seen in this lifetime on this planet is in Bali. And in Bali, they have constant festivals and rituals and everything that work with letting the dark be seen. You know, in China, for instance, the dragon, because you need to let people realize that these things are actually real forces, but they're creative forces. They're not. There's no reason to be negative about the dark.
So it's the interaction between the two that creativity comes from?
Mm-hmm. Well, the interaction, the creative force is always working with the dark and the light. And I've had a lot of fun with this trilogy because my daughter is my illustrator, Liz Clow, and she did a beautiful job. And one of the things she said when I first got started, because Gwilda, I tend to be kind of a really nice person. I'm a mom and I'm a wife and all that. And my daughter, who's a Scorpio, when she saw what I was doing with Armando in the beginning, she said, "Make him really bad, Mom." And I listened to her, and she was right, because I discovered after 10 or 11 years of writing, I discovered that if Armando was going to be able to go to the light, it could only occur in literature, in a trilogy, if I had first made him really bad. So the big challenge in Ruby Crystal, you would agree, I think, is Armando, right?
Well, he's the biggest challenge all the way through, I believe.
Well, actually, he did. He really changes. And I know that's possible because I've seen people do it. But it was really fun to write about it.
Did he have the mustache, the villain?
No, he's really a hot guy. I mean, really, he was like it. And he starts out as a famous painter in Rome in his 40s, and all the girls would like to have Armando until they find out. And so,
and then not so much. Barbara,
yeah, but then
the entire trilogy seems to be delivering a message, even though it's a progression. What is that message?
Oh boy, good for you. That the message, the deepest message in it is showing how the different characters work with different dimensions. So if you look closely, and I don't advise looking closely, I think you should just enjoy. But what's happening is those characters are having dimensional experiences in different dimensions, and then how it's affecting them is being described. So you could say at that level, what I did here, okay, now my work on multidimensionality came in with the Pleiadian Agenda, which was published in 1995. And that was a channel book from the Pleiades. And it's the only time I've ever channeled a book. And it was a bizarre experience, but I brought it in. And then for the next 10 years, I analyzed what the Pleiadians were saying from the point of view of science. And so the second book is called Alchemy. And I'm sorry, there's a noise. You hearing a noise in the background? Oh, good. Somebody's bashing outside. The Alchemy of Nine Dimensions, it came out in 2004 and then came out revised in 2011. And anybody who gets into it should get the 2011 edition. But Alchemy of Nine Dimensions examines all the 9 dimensions from a scientific point of view. And this is really fascinating and very complicated because, for example, the fourth dimension, which Einstein decoded so well, is actually quantum mechanics, and it's actually quantum physics. And this is not easy stuff. And when we get into the fifth dimension, we're working into the actual physiology of the waveforms in the heart. We get into the sixth dimension, sacred geometry, seventh dimension, sacred sound. And so it's a scientific examination of the dimensions. And then but the issue was, okay, I went out and taught workshops for 15, 20 years, activating those 9 levels with people. So they had the opportunity to learn with me, actually globally. But then as I got to the age that I've come to, I realized if I could put this in fiction, and this was not the original purpose of this trilogy. The original purpose was priestly sexual abuse, and it just started unfolding. But as it started unfolding, and as I watched what the characters were doing, I realized, oh my God, the reader could experience a dimension just by what a character was experiencing. So really the real purpose would be to find a way before I go to another zone, which is not going to be too long from here, find a way to get that down on paper so people could experience it.
It sounds like maybe you're engaging the shamanic practice of transformation through storytelling.
Oh yeah, exactly. Sure. Wouldn't that be a simpler way to put it? Good for you. You summarized it. Yeah.
One of my moments of brilliance, right?
Revelations from the Source, the last book. I decided, okay, this is my last chance, or I'm going to put in a description of a 9-dimensional ceremony. So in the last book, the 3rd book, all the characters get together and they do a 9-dimensional ceremony at Sintra, Italy, which is a really incredible sacred site. So I integrated the sacred site with the characters, with the 9-dimensional teaching, just to make sure that somewhere there was in existence was a description of how this whole thing works. And last comment about that would be, I really believe that a lot of the ceremonies over hundreds of thousands of years have been ceremonies of this type. The question is, how do you in the modern age describe that in literature?
There is a challenge because there's so much energetic things going on behind the scenes of any ceremony. Now, I assume that you use the principles that you've learned from all sorts of different indigenous practices to put together the ceremony in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, in my case, I'm part Cherokee and was trained as a Cherokee teacher. So a lot of the techniques I use are just coming from indigenous Native American teaching. But what this ceremony in this case does, it works with the indigenous method, but it's alchemical. And that's what's really fun about dimensionality, is the real way to approach dimensionality is alchemical. And that's how I did it.
Well, Barbara, it's the time in the program when I have to ask you, what is your mission?
Oh, my mission is to just be here for every person that I can communicate with during this really, really difficult time, because I don't want to underestimate how hard this is going to be. So what we've seen during COVID is just a peek at how hard this could be. And so I'm just here doing the best I can.
Well, you've certainly given us a beautiful body of work for years on end, and I really appreciate, from all of us, we honor what you're bringing.
Well, thank you.
So let's go back in the little time we have left let's go full circle into the priestly abuse in the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
What part do you think that plays in this whole drama that's playing out during this time?
Well, you asked really good questions. I think that we're going to go through a series of exposures of the Catholic Church. And I think the first level of exposure has been understanding how they've lied to us for so many years. And that's coming through the issue of whether Jesus was married and has a family, which I cover, and his issues about Mary Magdalene I cover in detail in the trilogy. And then the next level of exposure, I think, is the understanding of the destruction of the Gnostic wisdom. And a lot of that has been coming through a teacher that I admire very much. His name is John Lamb Lash in his works. And then the next level of exposure I took a crack at, which is priestly sexual abuse in the church. But I think the next level coming, and I don't know if there's any more after this, is going to be the financial behavior of the Catholic Church. And of course, some of that's coming out with the settlements. But it's important to understand that the Catholic Church is one of 3 of the most powerful institutions on this planet. The Catholic Church is really coming right out of the Roman Empire, and then it's coming right up to the current moment. Another powerful place on the planet, of course, is Washington, D.C. Another powerful place on the planet is London banking. But the Catholic Church, the financial apparatus, goes right back to the Roman Empire and is at the basis of a lot of the banking and power systems on our planet. And I think people need to see that for what it is. So something's going to happen. I'm not seeing it so far, but it's going to come.
I have to agree with you. Things can't continue in this vein. I think we've ridden this horse as far as we can, and it's time to put out a safety net for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So what's next for you, Barbara?
What's next? Well, I'm in the middle of figuring that out. And I may write another nonfiction book. Probably if I do, it'll be about Chiron, because there's work to do there. And I also would love to finish the fourth book in the trilogy. Do a fourth book for the trilogy, because the character, and again, you haven't read those two, so you don't know this character, but
Right.
a really great character shows up in Source. His name is Alessandro de Medici.
Well, I hate to interrupt, Barbara, but unfortunately, we could go on forever, but we are
Anyway,
out of
I
time.
don't know what I'm going to do, but it's going to be one of those.
Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you.
Our guest this hour has been Barbara Hand Clow, an internationally acclaimed astrologer, ceremonial teacher, and author of fiction and nonfiction. Her website, handclow2012.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy past archived episodes, visit www.missionevolution.org. And please be sure to join us right here next time as this mission continues, bringing information, resources, and support to a rapidly evolving world.